It is now time to introduce our main speaker, John.
My name is John, and I'm an alcoholic. You know, over the time that I have been sober, for at least the first 20 years, I always identified with my first and last name. An old man once told me when I first went to Radford in the early 80s that everybody knew you was drunk, they might as well know you're sober. And I have found that I always felt more comfortable saying my last name. That was before the advent of eBay and the internet. When I find my talks for sale on eBay, I kind of cringe a little at that, mostly because they don't get very many high bids. But since we are recording this, as I was told earlier, I will stick with my first name from now on. I don't like doing that, actually, but I think if my last name was Smith, it would be less of an embarrassment, but I'll just stick with John. Second most popular male name in the world, first being Mohammed. Just a little piece of trivia information. You know, it's really easy. I love this meeting. I've been going to it since there was that really big electric plug outside of Rodeo for Ed's car. Yeah, not too many old people in this room, huh? I will qualify first to let you know that indeed I belong here, that I haven't spent the last 28 years just hiding out here because of the excellent coffee and gourmet treats that are given. I am an anomaly. I think most of us in our individual ways are. But when I look at my history, before I even drank, most of my existence and persona was unusual and fairly unique to my environment. Some of that was real. A lot of it was fabricated by myself. But I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, to a very Catholic family. But the anomaly was that I was an only child. Now, French Catholics in New Orleans love to fuck. And there is this byproduct of fucking. But when I was 2 years old, my father left. His name was John as well. Quickly married another woman, had a son, named him John. My grandfather's name was John. We were sort of the white George Foremans of New Orleans, I guess. But growing up, very Catholic and an only child set me up for a world that I had to create in order to create buffers between me and the rest of reality. Because from my earliest memory, the most overriding emotion that I possessed was fear. Fear that I was not the same as everyone else, that I was less than everyone else, because I was so different than everyone else. I was a very devout Catholic for many years. Until I was 16, I was convinced that I would become a priest. And at 16, I discovered two things that sort of put a chink in that plan, which one was Friedrich Nietzsche, and the second was my dick. Later investigation proved to me that the dick quotient was really not a barrier in the Catholic Church. But I didn't know that at the time. I was a liar from the get-go. I was so afraid that you would find out who I really was that I was very glib and facile in finding out what it was you would like me to be And I could, like a chameleon, become that. And that pervaded my personality for, well, what time is it? For a really, really long time. I was so afraid. Part of it was the Catholic Church. I mean, I was condemned at birth, and I had no opportunity to save myself other than dying in the name of this fellow that we prayed to a lot. But I loved it. I loved the ritual, and I loved the dogma, and I loved confession. I loved going into a small, dark room with an anonymous silhouette on the other side of the screen, and I could unburden myself of all of the anger and fear and doubt that I had about who I was as a person. And after confession, on many occasions, I would walk outside of the church, Our Lady of Prompt Succor, and stand on the street corner, close my eyes, wait a few seconds, and then run across the street, hoping that I would be hit by a bus or a truck and die, knowing that at least I would only have to spend a little time in purgatory and then be pulled up into heaven. I didn't drink as a child. I mean, I grew up in a city that, well, New Orleans, does one need to say more? Or the signs on the bars say, happy hour, any waking moment. But it wasn't something that I was attracted to, because I was a devout Christian, a Catholic. My father was an alcoholic. Sidebar to this, I've always said that my father died of alcoholism. And my wife, who I've been married to for 35 years, kept saying, you don't know that. You didn't know him. You don't know how he died. And I had to finally admit that that was correct. So in the late 70s, I decided to go to New Orleans and find out. I had never seen him. He lived 3 miles from my house, and I never saw him. I decided to go see him. I had become an actor by then and was making a decent amount of money, and decided to go to New Orleans to find out who this man was. And when I bought the plane ticket, I got a phone call that he had died the day before. Now I have 3 brothers and 2 sisters whom I've never met. And I finally decided, because some idiot asked me if I would consider writing a memoir about my life, that I should find out if this was the truth. So I called this sister whom I never talked to before, very successful doctor. Our father died when she was 18, and for her 18 years, she never knew him. Very Southern Gothic. He lived in the house, in his own room, drank all day long, and had absolutely nothing to do with her life, just like he had nothing to do with mine, except that he was absent. And this plays really strongly into my personality, because I didn't have any siblings. I didn't have any body to bounce this idea off of, that I was a loser, that if I was worthy, he would have stayed. So, not drinking, at 17 years old, I decided I've got to find something. By this time, I had left the church for all practical purposes, although I was trained by Catholics all my life in school. And I decided to drink. And I got drunk one night outside of a country and western bar in Biloxi, Mississippi. I threw up immediately. And I was, I can't listen to Johnny Cash to this day because of that. But I didn't like it so much. And shortly after, I got a job as a radio DJ in New Orleans in '66. And somebody turned me on to marijuana. And it was the 60s in the French Quarter, and it was great. It was the best 3 years of using that existed. Women, New Orleans, the French Quarter, Peter Fonda and Dennis Hopper trying to make Easy Rider, hanging out with intellectuals and artists, and I thought I had found where I wanted to be. And I still didn't drink, sporadically, but not much. It was mostly drugs, LSD, marijuana, psilocybin. I loved hallucinogenics because it allowed me to firmly put in place the reality that I wanted to think was me and play it out completely without any compunction about it being real or not. I went so far as to create an individual with a different name from a different country, and I was him. I had relationships with women for months under this other person. Never knew to the time we broke up that I was not who I said I was. I often wonder if they watch television and go, that fucking guy looks like... I knew this guy from Scotland in the late 60s named Macbeth. My horizon of literature was rather narrow then, so Macbeth seemed Scottish, isn't it? It's Scottish. But I would go to any length for you not to know who I was. A friend here mentioned a story that I tell often, and it would be the last of my early drunkalogue, but it just shows so crystal clear how afraid I was. And I was only 10 years old when this happened. I had lost a religion book that I needed for a class that I was going to with Sister Mary Rhino, whoever my teacher was at the time. I lost the book, and I knew that she was going to beat the shit out of me, or punish me, or humiliate me in some way, which is sort of a hobby with nuns and priests. So I decided I had to find a way to get out of it, to not take responsibility for it. So I ran away from the school during recess and was gone for most of the day. I hung out at the river, which is very close, on the levees by the French Quarter. And as the afternoon waned on, I realized I couldn't, what the fuck was I going to do? I couldn't go anywhere. I didn't have any money. So I had to go back. But how do I go back? Well, I tore my clothes. I actually punched walls in the sidewalk to scrape up my knuckles. And I walked back to the school limping and hurting and crying. And when I was discovered by the nuns, they came swooshing down on me and asked what happened. Where were you? And I told them the truth. I had been kidnapped off the schoolyard. And a man kept me in a van by the river. God bless Chris Farley. I'm not sure he got that idea from me, but I said it before him. So I was taken home, swooped up by my mother, and given soup and ice cream, and then there was a knock on the door, and there were two men there in suits, and they were New Orleans policemen. My mother had called the police because her son had been kidnapped, and we must find this nefarious criminal. And so I gave a description of this man. Made it up. Who knows? It looked like Henry Fonda, or, I'm old enough to, I could have said he looked like Charlie Chaplin. And they wrote it down and went away and never heard from them. A week passed. Great. Everything's fine. Cool. Until they came and said they had found him. This is called a dilemma. Do I fess up that I lied? Or do I let this fucker fry? Sort of like Jack Benny when the thief asked for his money and he hesitated and the thief said, "What are you doing?" And Jack Benny said, "I'm thinking." But I fessed up. And I was beaten the shit out of by the nuns. Not to mention my grandfather. So that's how my life was. Whatever was out there, whatever I felt I knew wasn't right. So I had to find a way to vacillate between truth, my own reality, and what I thought would be okay that I could get by so you didn't know who I was. And when I discovered alcohol, which was relatively late, as I said, really not until I came to LA to pursue a career in my chosen profession, that I discovered alcohol at a deep core spiritual level, and drank profusely and consistently and without regard for anybody else who I would hurt or who I had to lie to. Now, I was working by now. I wasn't on the street alcoholic, bum. I was working. I was on a television series. I was working in theater. And I drank and drank and drank. Simultaneously during this time, coincidentally during this time, my wife gave birth to our first son. And at 2 years old, I did the exact same thing that my father did to me. I left. I couldn't stand being who I was there anymore. And I left. And for 10 months, my wife wouldn't let me come back. One day she looked at me and said, "I do realize that you want to die. Would you please not do it in front of the children?" And so I lived on a sailboat in Marina del Rey and snorted heroin, pissed in an orange juice bottle, and probably didn't really leave that boat for about 3 months. More of those, Cadillac through the door, whatever piece of shit I could afford to buy at the time. Still working, giving all my money to Elizabeth and our children, and just wanting to get the fuck out. I was a stone cold blackout drunk. I mean, I came to in places I had no idea where I'd been, how I got where I was thinking about going, twice on airplanes. No idea. Too embarrassed to ask, where are we going? Not a question often asked by a passenger on a plane. And I would try to discern by accents, by how's the weather there? Invariably, the 2 times that it was, I was going home. I was going to New Orleans because I had friends I could hide out with. So let's flash forward. My wife took me back in, still drinking. May of 1981, I did it again. I disappeared. And I was not a partying kind of drunk. I didn't go out and fuck a lot and go to clubs. I got the biggest bottle of my drink of choice, which was cognac, sit in my car under the Santa Monica Bridge by the pier and drink by myself. So May of 81, I went back to New Orleans, and I'm sitting with my oldest friend in the world, who is still my oldest friend. We met in the 4th grade. And I'm powering down beer and bourbon and whatever I could get. And he looked at me and he said, "Aren't you fucking drunk yet?" No. Yikes. What now? Came back to LA and just, the synchronicity, Carl Jung's wonderful theory of how every particle affects every other particle in the universe. I had to find a place to hide. I had to have a good excuse as to why I had disappeared. It couldn't be, I got on a plane, I went to New Orleans and dropped acid and drank for 2 weeks. So I walked to a hospital, and it happened to be on Century Boulevard Hospital. And I heard that they had an alcoholic ward, and walked in, and I said, I have to be here because I got to be here. So they put me in a room, and next to the bed was a table, and on the table was the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've been always in my life a voracious reader. It's the one sometimes saving grace to my insanity was that I could hide in a book. And I read the book that afternoon, page 1 to the last page, and put it down and said to myself, holy shit, that's the problem. I'm an alcoholic. Well, glad I got that out of the way. Now I can drink in peace. At least I know. So for about 6 months, I never went to meetings. They took us to a meeting somewhere. They put us in a van with a lot of guys with shaved heads, and here is this, at the time, bloated, fat white boy with this enormous scar. I'd done a movie and put my face through a window and a door during a scene, and so my nose was sort of hanging off, and I looked pretty bad. But I left after a week because I figured, well, I'm just going to do what I have to do. Flash forward to February of 1982. February 5th, 1982, I was sitting with a friend who I'd gotten drunk with a lot, big line of cocaine on the table, big bottle of Johnny Walker's Black, perfect evening, wow, great. I'd just done a guest shot on a sitcom, which I was fired from, so I got paid for doing nothing. Sidebar that had nothing to do with my drinking, another story. Anyway, I'm sitting there, and I had this out-of-body experience. We'll get to religion in a minute, but I saw myself sitting at the table in the third person, and the only thought that came to my mind was, what a fucking loser. I was back in my body, I looked at the fellow across the table from me and said, "Tom, I'm going to take a leak. I'll be right back." And I got up from the chair, walked out of his house, got into his car, got into my car, went home, and that was it. I was done. I don't know why, even now, I don't know why, but I knew I was done. I was struck sober that night. Now, being Catholic, I have very heavy atheistic tendencies. And I never chalked it up to Providence or God. You know, once I read the book and realized this moment of clarity thing, that's, I think, what happened. You know, that moment where, in the same breath, you cannot conceive of living without a drink, you cannot conceive of living with a drink. Simultaneous thoughts, the duplicity of those two statements together at the same time cannot hold the same space at the same time. And that night, not being able to conceive of living with a drink, won. When they took us to those meetings when I was in the hospital, I met one fellow who I sort of identified with, a guy named Ed. And I had his phone number. And I called and I said, "You know what? I'm not going to drink anymore. What do I do now?" And he took me to a meeting at an old church on Yucca. February 6th, 1982 was the day I got sober, the day that is my anniversary. And the world opened up. There was a relief. I mean, it was the greatest spiritual shit I've ever taken in my life. To sit in a room with you, because I knew that there were other lepers out there like me. I knew it. I never saw them. I never saw them congregated. People who had come to the realization that a metamorphosis was necessary in their lives. And here was a place that gave you a set of rules to be able to complete that metamorphosis. I am a true believer. You know what? We all know. We speak from our own experience up here. I am not a consultant for AA. I do not believe all of it. I do not follow all of it. So all I can speak to is what happened to me. I got sober on my own. God did not get me sober. AA did not get me sober. John got sober that night. What AA gives me and gave me then was a way to live sober, with less pain, less grief, less anger, less loneliness, less terminal uniqueness than I never felt in my life. And being Catholic and priest-like, I too would try to get people sober. But you know what? Guys in bars don't necessarily take kindly to a guy sitting next to them and putting the big book in front of them on the bar. I found this out the hard way. But I became a zealot from day one. I believed everything that was in this book, regardless. You know, and again, with the synchronicity of this program, the history that I've read, when Bill Wilson said higher power instead of God, it opened up the door for any atheist, any agnostic, any Mormon, anybody to find a higher power that didn't necessarily equate with the name God. My first sponsor, my sponsor, is a fat Jewish atheist. My home group is We Agnostics. He wrote down a sentence, a partial sentence on a piece of paper when I was a month sober. And the sentence said, "God as I understand God is," with an ellipsis behind it. He gave me the piece of paper and told me, "Go home and finish the sentence." Well, I labored at this for 2 weeks easily. I wanted to have the most succinct, illuminated, artistic definition of God as I understand God. And I finally did it. And I brought it back to him, and I handed it to him, and the fucker didn't even look at it. He said, "Did you finish it?" I said, "Yes." He tore it up, and he said, "Fine, now pray to it." So that's what I've been doing for 28 years. Praying to my version of God, which is the original cause. No matter what you think of personalities, dogma, faiths, there was an original cause to all of this. There's an original cause to me. And I would think the same original cause to all of us. And that has saved me so many times that I have just allowed myself to be part of that original cause. Not to be too flamboyant, which I have a tendency to be glib and overbearing and verbose. The steps, you gotta fucking work the steps. And work is a weird word if you're new. You know, I found it weird. Work, what the fuck does that mean? Well, live it. Just try to do what it says. Just try to experience it in your daily life. You know, find a way. I loved the fourth step. Whew, I spent 2 years on the fourth step. Tolstoy would have looked at it and go, "Oi, I couldn't have written that much." And I read every goddamn word to Merle, and he's a saint for listening to it, because it was, I mean, it made Hunter S. Thompson look like Winnie the Pooh. I mean, it was. But I have come to myself, finally, in Alcoholics Anonymous. You know, I spent the day, you know what I spent the day doing? I spent the day reading on the internet how much Alcoholics Anonymous fails. How few people actually stay sober in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I actually used to talk about that a lot, that most drunks die drunk. And I have a lot of dead friends who are proof of that even after 10, 15, 20 years of sobriety. I don't want to be one of those guys. So, a habit I got into very early was when somebody went out and they came back in, my first question to them, what did you stop doing? What did you stop doing? Did you stop going to meetings? Did you stop being open with the people around you? Did you start holding resentments? Did you start judging the room? Did you sit in the back and withdraw? Because eventually, we all do that to some degree. Even I do. You know, I don't attend as many meetings as I used to. I don't think because I'm 28 years sober and I don't need it. I love this place. I fucking love this place. But it is a job. It is a job. And like our first speaker said, I went to a meeting 2 weeks after I was sober, and a famous actor was the speaker. And my life fell out of his mouth. And I stood in the back of the room with my Yankee baseball cap pulled over my eyes. And my thought was, holy shit, this is where I belong. You're where I belong. And it is a, miracle is a strong word, you know? Because when I would think about God and saving my life, I said, why didn't you save Eric Clapton's kid instead of me? What, you know, what is that? I don't buy that, really. I should have died several times. I wrecked my car several times in blackouts. I was arrested twice in the same fucking week for drunk driving on the sidewalk on Los Feliz Boulevard. Kind of hard to talk yourself out of that one. But in those days, in the early 80s, they slapped you on the wrist and you went on your way. Stay here if you want to find the possibility of having a relationship with yourself first that I never had before I came here. You know, I became an actor for a reason. I love being other people. And I found out there was a place you could go where they paid you to do that. It's a perfect job for a lazy, self-delusional alcoholic. I absolutely love it. But this place gave me, and because of my love of fellowship, because I did love church, I loved being in there with other people who looked like they were going for the same goal. Even if I couldn't identify with them personally, we all had the same overarching ambition, was to reach some level of soulfulness and spirituality that allowed us to be comfortable in our own skins and the willingness to reach out to another who may not be as comfortable and just say, I'm here. You can be here too. It's great. You know, I am definitely a cheerleader for Alcoholics Anonymous, no matter what the statistics show. I don't know any place that's better for people to gather with a common goal and a common cause and relate to each other on so many different levels because of the time that we've been here, it's absolutely spectacular. But you have to be a participant. At some point, you have to decide to participate. Because if you don't, you will leave. Because a lot of the stuff that you hear in here is pretty fucking lame. You can't identify with it. But you have to get beyond the veil of the particulars and look at the absolute specific of why we are here. I guess 28 years is a while. Coincidentally, I found out, never knew this, my daughter found out years later when she was doing a paper for school that I got sober on the day that my father was born. Another piece of little synchronicity. Keep coming back. And I want to tell you, I always like to finish. The whole thing about God, find your higher power. Is it the ocean? Is it the sun? I don't care. Is it the dancing bear in the woods that you saw when you were a child? I had a speed freak who prayed to Pee Wee Herman as a sponsee. It's fine. That's fine. Because I'll tell you how God feels about my sobriety. A man goes into a church. He's deeply in debt. He has $5,000 in his pocket, and he owes the mob $15,000. And he goes to church, and he gets on his knees and says, "Please, God, help me find a way to get this money, because if not, they're going to kill me." And all of a sudden, out of the stillness, a voice comes and says, "Go to Vegas." The guy goes to Vegas. He's got to listen to the voice. The voice says to him when he walks into the casino, "Go to the blackjack table." Okay, I'll go. He sits at the blackjack table. The voice says, "Bet it all." Bet it all. Puts the $5,000 down. Cards come out. He's got a 10 and a 2. The voice says, "Take a hit." But at 12, the dealer could take a hit. He's got 12. He takes a hit. Gets an 8. 20. God damn it, fantastic. Voice says, "Take another hit." I've got 20. I can't possibly lose. Take another hit. And he does. And he gets an ace. 21. And there's silence. And then the voice says, "I don't fucking believe it." Thank you for letting me share.
Oh, I'm done?
Yeah, you're done. Love you.